Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from K. Michelle called More Issues Than Vogue. When I first covered K. Michelle near the end of 2014, I found myself a little bit surprised. That had been a year where I was taking more tentative steps to appreciating more R&B, and as such I had been game to K. Michelle's somewhat unique position in the scene. She had played the reality show game, but you could tell there was a unique songwriting voice that came through on her sophomore album, Anyone Wanna Buy a Heart? A fiercely independent and imaginative writer that had some genuine promise. That record had the potential to be a real smash, potential that wasn't really realized thanks to frustratingly cheap production and a vocal performance that brought a lot of volume, but not quite the tact or emotive subtlety to match some of the writing. In other words, definitely a good record, but a flawed one all the same. As such, I was strongly debating whether or not I would even bother to cover her third album, More Issues Than Vogue, that came out recently. On the one hand, it was reportedly a greater stab towards differing genres and styles, of which K. Michelle has shown a tendency towards on her sophomore release, so you kind of expected it. There had been some odd instrumental choices there that I actually kind of liked. But what gave me a lot of pause were the songwriting credits, namely that K. Michelle didn't have writing credits at all on over half the album. This is coming after a record where she had writing credits on every single song and a lot fewer co-writers overall, and it gave me some concern that her unique personality and her writing would end up being a little bit diminished, especially when there was no guarantee her production team was top quality. But hey, it could work, so I dug into More Issues Than Vogue. How'd it turn out? Well, here's the thing. Like her last album, More Issues Than Vogue is better than many people would presume or expect. And yet, if this record is taking any steps to resolving some of the issues of her 2014 release, those steps are haphazard at best. And as such, it's a bit of a frustrating listen. It's more diverse in its sound and will probably end up having more staying power with more unique and better songs, but that can kind of cut both ways. It might have a few of her best tracks, but it's also got one of her absolute worst, which in an odd way seems to average out to holding steady is a pretty good, likely underappreciated record, even though I wouldn't quite say it's a great one. So let's start off with K. Michelle herself, and if there's any strength that makes this record stand out, it's her. A ton of vocal personality, a huge range, and while she really isn't subtle, more often than not, this record pivots towards her strengths in soul and 90s inspired R&B. Now, the one thing that characterized many of the darker songs on Anyone Wanna Buy a Heart was its borderline instability, both in the writing and the vocals. But since More Issues Than Vogue is a little bit more reserved and controlled, it requires K. Michelle to bring some more poise to the table, and to her credit, she proves mostly capable of that, especially when she's taking a firm stance against guys who did her wrong, like on Not a Little Bit or These Men Are Time. And while I did cringe a little bit at the high note on the messy relationship and on If It Ain't Love, you could tell that she was kind of pushing for that note. When she hops in the more gentle All I Got, she proves plenty capable. She sounds really good. Now, the one thing that caught me off guard in a really good way was the opening track, Mindful. I know it was T-Pain who wrote those bars, but K. Michelle has such a forceful, authoritative delivery that if she wanted to pivot towards hip-hop, her voice would at least be distinctive in the scene, and make no mistake, that voice means that most of her guest stars just aren't on the same level. Jason Derulo does get some okay interplay with her on Make the Bed, even if it is definitely clear he's playing the second fiddle, but on the absolute worst track, Rich, Yo Gotti sounds half asleep, and Trina chooses to ramp up her obnoxiousness, and it is just intolerable. Granted, there are more reasons than that why Rich is such a god-awful song, so might as well talk about songwriting and themes. Now, keep in mind, I don't really mind K. Michelle bragging or smacking down those who did her wrong. Even if she is kind of off base or running up to the line of good taste, she's got enough personality to get away with a lot, and she doesn't rely on luxury porn. So a lot of tracks like Mindful or the many names that she drops on These Men, that tends to work for me. And I actually really liked Nightstand, a barely failed smackdown on Meek Mill, which I'd argue probably lands as many hits as Drake ever did on Meek Mill back in 2015, calling into account his masculinity, his false flexing, his lying, and how she'd rather turn to her vibrator on her nightstand and some weed rather than him. It reminds me a little bit of Beyonce and Nicki Minaj's Feeling Myself, but K. Michelle's blunt honesty and a few clever lines give her a significant boost. I like this a lot more. And yet, she's not just all smack talk. The complicated situations of Make the Bed, If It Ain't Love, and Sleep Like a Baby might be handled without a lot of tact in the writing. They're not entirely complex songs, but lyrically they do connect. They get the formula right. And in the case of songs that are the Moving On track, Not a Little Bit, or the genuinely sweet love song, All I Got, the writing hits hits all the notes that it needs to, which puts to bed a lot of the fears I had about fewer writing credits coming from her herself. I will say that many of these tracks aim for less complicated framing, again they're simpler songs, but that can work if the subject matter connects, which brings us to Rich. Look, I might like and respect K. Michelle on tracks like Ain't You, where she's fully conscious of her own money and success and pursues guys on a similar level, not for gold digging, but for equality in the relationship. But Rich is just insipid, vapid greed. I don't care about rich people problems, brand name porn does not interest me, and the tone of the song just screams obnoxiousness. It does nothing for me whatsoever. But now we gotta get to the elephant in the room, and probably the biggest element that kept me from revisiting Anyone Wanna Buy a Heart: instrumentation and production. Now the big issues there came in how thin and cheap so much of the instrumentation sounded, even if it did reflect some real imagination and instrumental choices, and the pile-up of vocal effects did not help accentuating K. Michelle's personality. On the plus side, they mostly got rid of all that, with the exception of the odd oily layers on Got 'Em Like or the blatant auto-tune on, you guessed it, Rich, which might expose more flaws in K. Michelle's vocals, but they thankfully sound a lot more organic. The issue is that the instrumentation and production that can complement her is kinda hit and miss. On the one hand, you get 90s inspired R&B ballads like Not a Little Bit or All I Got, which play out some great piano lines, the strings, and the live drums with some phenomenal groove here. That's where we get to the real soul of Ain't You with the liquid guitars, or These Men in Time with the elegant strings and the potent bass guitar. Hell, I even admired how much a Nightstand managed without having any real percussion there. Just glittering streams of piano and bass guitar, at least until the beat switched up into a buzzed out and hollow trap remix that actually sounded halfway decent. And then we get the tighter, wiry synths of Make the Bed with Jason Derulo, which sounds a bit like a cross between the songs Try Me and Cheyenne from his last album, Everything Is For, and I mean that as a compliment. But here's the frustrating thing. Putting aside minor nitpicks like the constant drop off of the groove at the end of each chorus on time that totally kills the momentum, most of this production doesn't give quite enough to let K. Michelle room to breathe against it. Not quite as opulent or organic as it could be to really support her and really give her a lot of bombast. At least it tones that feeling a little bit thin if they're not swamped out in reverb. Not quite with the body to really make tracks like the electro-pop closers Sleep Like a Baby really connect for me. You can definitely tell they had more of a budget this time for instrumentation and production over the last album, and the melodies do come through a lot better, but it doesn't quite get all the way there. You give her a fuller budget, I think this album could have hit a lot harder. But at the end of the day, I think I'm gonna keep covering K. Michelle records, if only because she's got enough personality and blunt confidence to be appealing in modern R&B. Now, there are some dud tracks here and there. Ending the record with Rich and Sleep Like a Baby does not help, really not a solid ending, but they're ultimately canceled out by better songs, which leaves me feeling that this record is of similar quality to the last one, but perhaps might be more memorable as such. And on that note, I'm thinking about a light 7 out of 10 and a recommendation if you're a fan of this brand of R&B. But otherwise, it's definitely got some tunes that are worth a listen, so yeah, check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here. What did you guys think about this album? Did you honestly care about the reality show side? I honestly didn't touch on it, but that's because I don't watch any of the shows she was associated with, so never really bothered me all that much. I consider her an R&B singer and a pretty damn good one. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. My backlog's still pretty thick. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.